You're all very welcome here to the pillar room of the assembly rooms. My name's Graham Hickey. I'm the ringmaster from Dublin Civic Trust for you this morning and for the rest of the proceedings for today. So without further ado, I'd like to formally introduce our Chief Executive, Geraldine Walsh of the Civic Trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Graham. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A particular and special welcome to our Minister, Minister Hogan, Minister for Environment, Community and Local Government. So thank you very much for being with us today. And to all our speakers and chairpersons, especially those who've travelled from the UK, and to the London Parks and Gardens Society who have come in numbers to be with us today. And thank you all for being in attendance. Why are we here today? We're here because of a collaboration between Dublin Civic Trust and the Mountjoy Society to do an evaluation of particularly the Northern Squares. And this is supported by Dublin City Council, particularly the Parks Department. The challenge, I suppose, today is to listen intensely to our illustrious speakers who are going to look at the start of squares both in the UK and in Ireland, how they have evolved, their significance, the challenges today, and particularly how we come up with solutions. And we're in this extraordinary building. I think it's the first time for a lot of people, which is strange, because this was the great social innovation of Bartholomew Moss, a man born in the start of the 18th century, who through his entrepreneurship from his main objective, which was to put in place a lying-in hospital, he was a doctor, to use pleasure gardens as a means of support. So he leased 4 acres from the Gardner estate and set out gardens which were 2 years ahead of the building, which of course is the Rotunda Hospital. He chose one of the most illustrious architects of today, Castles, who at the time was building Leinster House. And his civic ambition was such that he regarded a hospital to be designed by the same person who was designing for the Premier Duke was needed for women in labour and for the birth of the new coming generations. And of course, it has fulfilled that purpose for the last 270 years. And here we have this extraordinary architectural set piece. And most of the generation of Dubliners born there, some of them ending up in Dáil Éireann. So they went from one castle's house to another. So that's been a terrific journey. And not alone have these 2 castle houses given birth to the leadership and continued then to house them, but it has also been the relation between the 2 great squares. Parnell Square started its life because of the south side of the square having its pleasure gardens and its great building. And so also the Leinster House set the tone for the development of Merrion Square. Sorry, I've just sort of lost my train of thought. The papers, as I said, will follow a route. So the question really that we're trying to ask today is, how are our squares, how is our Georgian architecture regarded within the psyche of the city? Is it protected? Is it something that's sort of cast aside? And yet, if you look at the squares, they actually form the boundary of what is the core of the city, untouched in 270 years since the 2 great developers, I suppose you'd call them in today's parlance, Gardner and Fitzwilliam, set out these squares. And with the exception of 1916 and the Civil War taking out part of O'Connell Street, nothing really has been touched. And I think if you compare that to other European capitals, we have an extraordinary, unique product, and something that we haven't really sweated that asset to the extent we could, and something that's needed more so today than ever, where indigenous products or indigenous resources in any nation have to be pride of place. Because with global capital, coming on a visit to most countries, depending on labour costs, good taxation in their favour, they'll come and go. But if we develop our indigenous industries, we control them, we know the extent of their employment, and they're not movable. So I think it behoves us to particularly take cognizance of that. How can we approach this? I think there are 2 or 3 points. One is to reevaluate what we have. Secondly, we've got to see how we can incentivise and subvent, whether we do through financial instruments or whether we do through direct subvention. And of course, we must use the existing legislation to its full and use the enforcement issues that come with that. We also need to reshape what has been the sort of, I suppose, trend for commercial use in the south side cities and get it more into residential. And we have to do re-evaluation of the north side, where maybe the standards of habitation or residential is not up to speed. What could underline that? In my view, and in the civic trusts and lots of people I've spoken to, we should consider maybe doing a master plan of the city, in other words, a DNA of the city, which has been done in cities like Bologna and Vienna to huge advantage, by which we can reference future plans against it and benchmark progress. And we also have to congratulate Dublin City Council, who have taken the first move in this direction by acquiring the old Colosseum block of buildings up in what is called Palace Row, just on the north side of the square, for the new city library. I think this reflects the civic ambition, rather than monetary ambition, that we've seen in the last 2 decades, which haven't been very endearing to the city. But the civic ambition of Bartholomew Moss, this extraordinary man. So, ladies and gentlemen, I now would like to ask our Minister to come and launch our conference here today.
Thank you very much, and I'm very pleased to be here today in the Pillar Room, and I'm hasten to add that I don't have too many opportunities and don't expect to have too many opportunities in the future to go next door. It's nice to be in the ballroom in any case. The assembly rooms are one of the forgotten civic complexes of Georgian Dublin, and as you see, it's largely intact. It's architecturally significant series of public entertainment rooms that originally addressed the gardens, but they were built to provide the funding and support for the Rotunda Hospital, which, as Geraldine has said, dates back 1757, the first purpose-built maternity hospital in these islands. And I'm advised that the construction of the assembly rooms commenced in 1784 to the design of Richard Johnson, though the argument has been reliably advanced that he did so under the guidance of Frederick Trench and James Gandon, who was principally remembered as architect of the headquarters building in my own department, the Custom House. So it's interesting to know the connection. Dublin's Georgian squares, Parnell and Mountjoy on the north side, Marion, Fitzwilliam and St. Stephen's Green on the south side are key moments in the urban planning of the 18th and early 19th centuries. And they provided and continue to provide the public open space necessary for urban life, the space necessary for social interaction, for pleasure, exercise, and just city living. So the question being posed today by our conference is, what is the future of the squares themselves and their hinterlands? And I am confident that with the key support of the City Council and the relevant government departments, including my own, that the future planning, conservation and regeneration of these historic places, not just as museum pieces but as part of a living city, will be safeguarded. Dublin squares have been home to many prominent figures, and these squares will still play a pivotal role in the arts and tourism and the culture of Dublin. Most importantly, they still are the everyday homes of many of our citizens of our capital city. Encouraging the use of the squares as places to live will be critical for the future, and this will require many actions on behalf of stakeholders like recording, designation and funding, and we need to foster the belief in the possibility of a future and enthusiasm for its achievement. For example, the belief and enthusiasm demonstrated by local community, voluntary and heritage groups such as the Mountjoy Square Society, the Dublin Civic Trust and the Irish Georgian Society. Without them, we wouldn't be here today. Discussion on the future of the historic Dublin Georgian squares would not even be on our agenda. So I'm also aware that Dublin City Council has exciting plans for the development of Parnell Square as a cultural quarter. And through the good offices of the Chief Architect and the Chairman of the Office of Public Works, the process of transferring the OPW property, the old Coláiste Mhuire buildings at the top of the square, to Dublin City as a new city library is almost complete. The OPW are also to be complimented for their role in preserving the building fabric and securing this site, and for engaging with Dublin City to seek the most appropriate civic reuse of the building. The new library will complement the existing Hugh Lane Art Gallery, originally Charlemont House, and indeed the adjacent Writers' Museum. The connection of these civic amenities with a pedestrian civic plaza will reinforce the historic relationship between Charlemont House and the Garden of Remembrance. So such a bold and visionary project can act as a catalyst for future regeneration and investment in the area. One of the first tasks, of course, is to record what exists. And I'm pleased to say that fieldwork for the National Inventory of Architectural Heritage Survey of Dublin City, being undertaken by the Department of Arts, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, is in progress. And in recognition of the historical neglect, the very first area to be recorded includes Mountjoy and Parnell Squares. It is intended that this comprehensive survey will be published in stages over the next few years. The mention of streetscape highlights the emerging importance of urban design considerations in the sensitive redevelopment of town and city cores. And a particular lesson of the design of our Georgian quarters is the necessity to observe building lines and to present active frontage to the public streets and squares. This ensures that the public realm in such areas is active and alive, which in turn helps discourage antisocial behaviour. So with the objective of promoting quality in urban design, and in order to provide guidance, the Department published a best practice manual, and jointly with my colleague, the Minister for Transport, Tourism and Sport, we've recently published a design manual for urban roads and streets. And this seeks, by promoting the principles of urban design and passive speed reduction techniques, to enhance the status of the pedestrian and cyclist in the design, and retrofit streets and roads in urban areas towards promoting more people-friendly town and city centres. It is important to acknowledge the various initiatives undertaken by Dublin City towards preserving and improving our Georgian heritage. In the 2011-2017 Development Plan, Dublin City adopted the policy SE2 to rejuvenate the North Georgian squares to complement those on the south side. And the Council has adopted a variety of policies, including promoting the cultural development of the area, a study to formulate detailed guidelines for active use of buildings in the area, and the encouragement of additional residential uses to improve the vibrancy of the city centre. The Dublin Squares, the area around the North Georgian core, represents an acute challenge for policymakers and for planners, and indeed for communities who are working and living in these areas, to see how they can both preserve these areas for heritage value, but also reach their full potential for the benefit of the social, economic and cultural life of the capital city. And as someone with a particular perspective on this area, with an office in the 18th century Gandon designed custom house on the north side of the Liffey, and of course as a regular visitor to Croke Park, where I have to pass through the North Georgian area and regularly around September, except this year for some reason, I have seen the potential that the area can offer, and which could be harnessed to spur renewal and regeneration. It's also an area that has a strong community and is highly residential. So you can contrast Merrion Square with less than 10 residents, with Mountjoy Square, which is reputed to have over 1,000 people living directly onto the square. So in an Irish context, this is unique, an area largely comprised of heritage properties so close to the centre of the capital city, which remains substantially residential in character. And at the heart of any renewal of the area to its true potential is the development of a strong vision for the area from government, at national and indeed from local government. Given the nature of this area, the potential that exists and the issues that arise, the local authority cannot be expected to address all this alone from a policy or resource perspective. So there is a strong need for central government and statutory agencies to share in development and implementation of the vision. The previous city manager, John Tierney, took significant steps to set a policy context in the latest development plan for the regeneration and preservation of the North Georgian core. With a new city manager, there is an opportunity again to take the evolution of this area to a new level. So I would hope that Mr. Keegan, and indeed be delighted to engage with him to see how we can advance this particular work. Accessing resources for renewal will always be a challenge particularly in these times. But we should look in the way in which we can use, as Geraldine says, some fiscal instruments in order to advance the work. A number of financial supports have been put in place to aid in the protection and conservation of built heritage in our towns and cities already. The Living City initiative, which was announced by the Minister for Finance in 2013 in collaboration with the Department of Arts, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, and which is the subject to EU state aid approval, is intended to use taxation mechanisms to provide a stimulus to the Georgian centres of Limerick and Waterford in a pilot programme. It is a targeted pilot tax incentive which aims to promote the regeneration of urban historic areas by encouraging people back to the centre of Irish cities to live in historic buildings, and by encouraging the regeneration of the retail heartland of central business districts. The initiative is designed to generate interest in refurbishing Georgian buildings with a view to attracting greater residential occupancy in these areas and restoring these areas to some of their former glory. This year also, Minister Deanahan launched the Historic Towns initiative with the Heritage Council and Fáilte Ireland to promote heritage-led regeneration of some of Ireland's historic towns. The pilot phase is for the towns of Listowel, Westport and Youghal, and Minister Deanahan's department, along with Fáilte Ireland, have allocated funding for each of these three towns to support improvements to the townscape, conservation work to protect structures and heritage interpretation. Dublin's planning and design history is recognised in the inclusion of the historic city of Dublin on Ireland's current tentative list for World Heritage status. The development of Georgia and Dublin marked a key moment in the history of the Age of Enlightenment, and Minister Deanahan yesterday hosted a conference for local authorities and community groups within these areas, the sites on Ireland's current tentative list for where World Heritage status are located. Now, I fully support the consultation within communities. It is a challenge, and it's going to be a major challenge to achieve this particular status, but we'll see how we get on, and we look forward to the work that's now underway. So to conclude, I would like to reiterate the support of my department, both from a proper planning, urban design and living city centre community perspective, to encourage the appropriate stabilisation and regeneration of the Georgian squares and their adjacent areas. In this task, I look forward to the continuing close cooperation between officials in my department with their colleagues in the Office of Public Works, the Department of Arts, Heritage and the Gaeltacht, and in this instance, Dublin City Council as the local authority, but in fact all local authorities who seek to promote the consolidation of their town or city centres. I'd like to wish every success to this conference, and I look forward to hearing from Geraldine arising from the outcomes that I'm sure there will be some outcomes from this conference. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Minister, and it's very heartening to hear of your department's commitment to the regeneration of the historic fabric of the city. And I know from within the Civic Trust, and particularly with your engagement with the Mantua Square Society, that you've expressed a very personal commitment to the regeneration of the North Georgian core, which is very greatly valued. I know the Minister has a very pressing agenda today, so we greatly appreciate the time that you've taken out to be with us this morning.